Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored to be among you today and to have this opportunity to address you. Indeed, it is a particular pleasure, rather rare for a foreign minister, to be among so many friends, so many people who have made such important contributions towards the development of the friendship between Bulgaria, the United States, and the Jewish people. I am grateful to you all for constantly promoting the friendship between our nations, for creating what is surely an exemplary framework which captures the deep affinity between us. This is something that I truly cherish and aim to develop further. Allow me, in particular, to also extend my warmest words of gratitude to Stanley Bergman, both for his impressive contribution to the relationship between Bulgaria and the Jewish community in the US, but also for making the committee such a widely respected institution. Let me also pay particular tribute to Mr. David Harris, without whom the friendship between my country and the American Jewish Committee would not be what it is today. David, thank you for your invaluable contribution to Bulgarian-US relations over the course of many years, and I sincerely hope over the course of many more to come. I value tremendously AJC's extremely competent and consistent support over the years as regards Bulgaria's transition to democracy, accession to NATO and the European Union, the development of our strategic relationship with the US, as well as the attainment of a most favored nation trade status with the US. Your contribution to what my country is today is noteworthy: a society which is free and anchored in Western institutions, a society in which our Jewish community lives openly and freely. I am also very familiar with your work in Brussels, where I've had productive collaboration with the Transatlantic Institute, as it was already mentioned, and its director, Daniel Schwementhal. I'm also convinced that the AJC will make further important contributions to the continued strong role of the United States in the international affairs. A destabilized global world needs more than ever an engaged America, an indispensable anchor of the current order. Our focus in this regard is on the strengthening of NATO and its eastern flank, the creation of a transatlantic market and energy independence. I belong to the generation that grew up just after the fall of the Iron Curtain and vividly remember that the 1990s were in thrall with a great illusion, a hope that humanity had once and for all ended, resorting to war and conflict. A hope that the conclusion of the great ideological clash of our time would put an end to such conflicts in principle. The system of international affairs of today still bears the features of that illusion, in which liberal democracy would effortlessly spread around the globe. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and into the 90s, democracy really did appear to be without alternatives. It really did seem that prosperity can be only grounded on liberty, and vice versa, that authoritarianism and poverty would inevitably collapse under the strength of a dream of freedom. It was precisely this sense of absence of alternatives that was at the core of the international system in that decade. Further strengthened by the conviction that fluid, open borders between democracies and non-democracies would lead authoritarian and totalitarian regimes to crumble and democratize. This was the strategy of soft power, which slowly but surely would lead to change for the better. Clearly, the situation today is different. September 11th, the terrorist acts in London, Madrid, and Paris, the criminal annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine, and the horrific activities of ISIS in Syria and Iraq all illustrate the return of alternative political and social models around the world. These might be repulsive to us, but are sufficiently seductive to many who stand ready to kill or die defending them. So, is it timely and worth our while to pose in such circumstances the question, are fluid borders still working to our benefit? I know that just uttering this question would be scandalous to many, but still, whose soft power is winning the day? That of our liberal democracies or that of its alternatives? I do not really have a convincing answer to this question at the present time, but I do know that getting that right would be the difference between victory and defeat. The ties Bulgaria and the Jewish people have between Bulgaria and the Jewish people have a long history, developed over time at both state and people-to-people level. Indeed, today we enjoy a strategic partnership and close government-to-government links with Israel, further strengthened by our common belief in liberal democracy. The last few years have seen a constant deepening of cooperation, covering an ever widely number of areas: defense, security, IT, tourism, agriculture, social contacts, etc. I am determined that we will continue to widen its scope and intensity. We also have historical links with the Palestinian people, a people with a right to an own state, but also an obligation to respect the integrity and the security of its neighbor. One can hardly envision an alternative to a situation where two states will exist side by side in peace and security. Moreover, the growing instability in the wider Middle East makes such an approach even more urgent. As ever, Bulgaria will continue to support and contribute to all efforts aimed at progress on the basis of negotiations, not violence and unilateral acts. Much has changed in the wider Middle East. Much has changed in the wider Middle East. In the last few years, the era of hopelessness and fear is gone. Social change is sweeping throughout the region. The people want their voice to be heard. They want an end to nepotism and economic stalemate. But transforming these desires into an orderly transition, turning them into institutions, is proving hard and will take time. We need to continue to help with economic reform, market access, institutional change, greater interaction between people, cooperation between civic organizations, etc. Our commitment will be tested not by the strength of our enthusiasm for change, but by the perseverance of our assistance. Moreover, there are increasing reasons to be concerned. Terror is on the rise. Entire states are being fractured with the potential for further expansion of terrorist organizations. Political instability abounds. Nuclear proliferation is still a matter of concern. And economies are finding it hard to adapt to post-crisis change. Security risks are increasing in the region, and stronger cooperation against terrorism and various other threats are the order of the day. I have consistently pressed that point, and I am hopeful that most of you share this analysis and course of action. I'm also convinced that my good friend and former Foreign Minister of Bulgaria, Nikolai Mladenov, in his capacity as a UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, will make a significant contribution to addressing the challenges in the region. A few words about the situation back at home. Over the course of the last few years, Bulgaria underwent a period of instability and loss of momentum and direction, largely manufactured by opponents of the European and the Euro-Atlantic geopolitical choice of the Bulgarian people. But 2013 and 14 witnessed the resurgence of Bulgarian civil society, its maturing into a real force for change. The Bulgarian citizens have handed us the task of further embedding the country in the EU and NATO, making ever more irreversible the choice of liberty, dignity, human rights that we all made after the fall of the Berlin Wall. At the same time, the country is becoming a borderline state facing increasing security risks. We are facing growing regional instability as a result of numerous wider processes, the rise of ISIS and geographical spread of terrorism, increased migration and refugee crisis, political instability across the Mediterranean region, but also due to the aggressive and revisionist behavior of Russia, which is undermining the pillars and values of the post-war European order. Our response has been to deepen our ties with NATO and strategic partners such as the United States to push on with military reform and investment to strengthen cooperation with our neighbors. Just as during the unstable 1990s, Bulgaria will go for a new, much-needed regional push. For instance, improving security cooperation with NATO and with allies like Turkey and Greece along the common borders, or more opportunities for cooperation between EU and NATO member states and those countries in our region which still have not joined. The world around us is changing ever faster. Globalization, greater migration and increased displacement of people and more refugees mean that our European societies will be ever more diverse and potentially more disparate. In many countries, demographic changes and economic growth require a more liberal immigration policy to counter negative trends. But this means that social balances, intergroup relations, culture will increasingly are under strain. We must recognize that this is the new, longer-term context in which we have to continue to counter xenophobia and anti-Semitism. I am determined to make sure that we never underestimate these dangers and Europe never succumbs to radical temptations again. Now, more than ever, we need to remind ourselves of the fragility of tolerance, to make sure that the lingering danger of the return of hatred towards others does not advance a single inch, that the constant risk of the banality of evil is countered every step of the way, and that we never see the ugly face of persecution and intolerance again. The memory of the Holocaust ought to be preserved, but also shared with every new generation, with every human being that learns how to live with others and celebrate their uniqueness. Bulgaria has a cherished tradition of interethnic and interreligious tolerance, but we must never cease strengthening it. This is a prime responsibility of my generation of Bulgarian politicians. We have to be determined politically, innovative in policy, entrepreneurial in responding to the pressures of this new environment, and in preserving the values of tolerance and human dignity. We have a rich history to draw from, centuries in which Christians, Muslims, and Jews not only lived peacefully side by side, but created a culturally diverse and rich society in a turbulent part of Europe. A wonderful patchwork of different, yet mutually enriching traditions, customs, habits. Moreover, this tradition goes beyond mere cohabitation. Indeed, Bulgarian Jews have become an integral part of society, part and parcel of our community. Even more importantly, this rich history has been made possible by the conviction and efforts of millions who make this happen on a daily basis. Bulgaria has a tradition of standing up and fighting for this invaluable achievement. Citizens and politicians arose to save the lives of nearly 5,000 Jews, compatriots during the Second World War. Bulgaria became home for many fleeing Armenians in 1915. Later, for many Russians persecuted by the Bolsheviks. Yet we must be forever mindful of moments that led to tragedy, our inability to prevent the deportation of Bulgarian Jews from the occupied territories to the concentration camps. I believe that the tragic experience of the Holocaust carries a universal message. It symbolizes the tragedy of human failure to counter evil, to recognize and act when that evil stares us in the face. But the memory of the Holocaust is also a call to action, a call to remain ever alert and act to ensure the peaceful and mutually enriching coexistence of different peoples, faiths, cultures. I firmly believe that the future of our globalized world can only be assured on the basis of that latter conviction. Thank you very much for the attention, and let me once again reiterate what a big honor for me it is to be here. Thank you.